Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and it's been a very long month, and it's the end of a work day at the end of a long week. I mean, June's been great. My sister got married in June. Oh, where are my glasses? Oh, let's put those away so you can see my beautiful eyes. Yeah, my sister got married. She looked lovely, but more importantly, I looked lovelier. And I had a great time, and I danced a lot. And here's a photo of me dancing. It was really good. Then I was quite wiped out to return to work, actually. And then I ended up catching something which apparently is not COVID, but is quite flooring. I had the day off work. I had a headache for 2.5 days. It's, what, 2 weeks later, I'm still just sort of shifting phlegm about my body and knackered and stuff. And, ugh. But hey, you don't care about all that. You're here for the books. What have I read this month? Well, last month, because I'm recording this on the 1st of January. Well, in June, I focused on non-fiction. My aim was mostly books about books. But I had a little side quest. Let's get started. So the first book I read, published last year, is called Wonderworks. It is by Angus Fletcher, and it says it's the literary invention and science of stories. And that's kind of where we are with it. It's all about book as technology and literature as technology. It's not just books, but TV shows and films and what have you. And the technology it is a technology that works on us psychologically. And so each chapter is a technique, literary technique, which is given a sort of cutesy invention name. There's a sort of a story about the creator of it, and then what it is, and then how it works from the point of view of neuroscience, usually, though it does shift into psychology as well. So you get the neuroscience behind catharsis, for example, and things like that. And I thought, this is quite interesting. When I was reading it, I was like, yeah, this is pretty interesting. I didn't agree with all of it. For example, there's a chapter about Virginia Woolf and James Joyce. It says that James Joyce's stream of consciousness is like little rat-a-tats of consciousness, very staccato, and you have to put them together. It's not relaxing. Whereas Virginia Woolf has a sort of smooth flow, an actual stream of consciousness. And what's more, her stream goes into different characters as you go through a book. And I agree with that, and I think there is a difference between reading Virginia Woolf and reading James Joyce's Ulysses. However, it then says that this stream is a really good way of relaxing and unburdening. It's a really good therapy. If it was such good therapy, I don't think Virginia Woolf would have filled her pockets with stones and drowned herself, And it does that a few times. It has a bit of a stretch, bit of a reach. You're like, I'm not sure it's quite that. But there were lots of interesting notions in the book. And I enjoyed it. But then I got to the end, and I wrote up my thoughts about it. And I thought about it, and I thought, actually, I really don't like this book. I don't like it for two reasons. One, it's got this notion of the inventors of these techniques. And a lot of these techniques are things that were in the zeitgeist, or things that were invented by lots of different people at once, or lots of people piled on and developed an idea. Or there's no sense of cultural flow in it. It's just, here's an inventor, they invented this. And you're like, they didn't invent that. Enheduanna, who was it, might be the first named author, but she didn't invent hymns to gods, though hers were very good and influential. These people didn't invent these things. They were part of the genre, part of the flow, part of the... so that was annoying. But most annoying was the conception, and I think it's a very modern conception, of the book as a tool or a medicine, and the reader as a passive slab. So this book does things to this reader. So if you're sad, read the happiness-making book, and it will make you happy, like a pill or a tool. It's all functional and passive, and it fails to notice or fails to recognise or acknowledge that the reader is essentially the co-creator of a book. The reader and the book come together to create the book, which is why when a book doesn't work, it's as much the reader's fault as the writer's. And this reader just didn't appreciate this mechanistic, tool-like way of seeing literature and this very passive way of seeing readers. It reminds me of friends I've had who've gone down sort of the mental health hole, where they used to be active participants in their own mental health, and now they're just passive. Oh, it's like weather, it happens to me. It's like, yeah, but in real life, when it rains, you put a raincoat on. You're not as passive as, these our passive brains that are sparked by books, and that's not quite how it works. We create together, and so in the end, it was a book with some interesting parts to it that I overall ended up not enjoying. But I didn't enjoy it until I finished it, if you know what I mean. If you don't, oh well. Next thing. A Place for Everything by Judith Flanders. This one was 2020. I'm saying the dates just because, look, I do read some modern books. It's about the history of alphabetical order. Yes, you heard me right. Alphabetical order. Excuse me. As I say, rearranging phlegm is not so good. Hang on. I'm going to keep repeating, This is staying in the video. It's disgusting. Have some wine to cheer me up. Needs food. Oh well. So yes, that book there, Alphabetical Order. It's about the history of the alphabetical order. It really is. I got it because I wanted to know why the alphabet is in the order it's in, because I've never really been very good at remembering the alphabet. Because the part of my brain that just goes, that's an arbitrary order. Why is B after A, da-di-da-di-da? And so, it doesn't explain that. Because essentially, though language and writing was invented by many cultures all over the world at different times, the alphabet was only invented in one place. North Egypt. I'm so healthy. North Egypt. And so by the time it's being used, the order's already solidified, and it's just kind of handy to keep it in the same order for learning purposes. So it doesn't really say why. Then the alphabet spreads into different languages, and they adapt it. And this book is mostly about the Catholic world, in the Latin, and then and then English and things. And she admits it. They occasionally dive into a bit of what Hebrews doing at this time or Arabic's doing at this time, but says, considering the scope of the work and it's for a popular audience, da-di-da-di-da, I'm going to focus on this. And I think that's good, because it shows that she's aware that the Catholic world is not the only world there is, but it's what we're focusing on. And so the rise in the alphabetical order shows a really interesting change in the way people think about words. And so in the old days, the Dark Ages, which actually, when you think of all the learning that happened, not very dark, you would never put books in an alphabetical order or information in an encyclopedia, because in a alphabetical order, Angelus, angels, are A, and Deus, God, is a D. Angels don't come before God. It's not just that in the beginning was the Word and the Word was God. It's not just that writing Deus is God. Not just a blasphemy thing. It's a purely common sense thing. If you're a literate person at this time, God comes before angels. Of course God comes before angels. It goes God, angels, people, great apes, mammals, da-di-da-di-da-di-da. Even when you get into like minerals, you have your good minerals and your bad minerals. You have your good, your top metals and your lower metals. That's why lead changing into gold, because the alchemists believed that their work was essentially to make lead try and be its best self, which is gold. And because everyone knew this is how you organise it. And back in the time when a big library is 50 books, and people are encouraged to read the whole book through and to try and memorise a book rather than you look things up. The system works fine, but then as printing and paper and cheaper copies of books, and you get more books. I mean, this private little library of mine is like triple, quadruple. And more than that, like 10, 20 times more than institutional libraries at the beginning of, say, the 13th century. So, as books become cheaper and more available, you need systems to catalogue them, and you need systems within books where encyclopedias start to come about. And so alphabetical order. And the big conceptual leap is words are made out of letters. And a part of this is the printing, because in a printing, you physically take out the letters and put them in. And so now Deus, yes, it means God, but it's also Deus. If I've spelled Deus right. Not sure. But yeah. And so this is the thing. And then people experiment with it and grow, and then we have the age we're now in, where there's an awful lot of alphabetical order. This was quite an interesting book. It did what I want a non-fiction book to do. It told me a little bit more about something than I probably wanted to know. One weird thing about the book. The author clearly regards alphabetical order as the best system and the most modern system. And she kind of denigrates people who, characters in history who don't use it. And people like Grosseteste who partially use it. It's like, oh, well, they're being partially modern, they're being partially enlightened. I think the alphabetical order is not that great, you know. My books are not alphabetized. I haven't gone. This is not an alphabetical system. It is a system, but it's broadly chronological along the back here. Over there are two bookcases of non-fiction books, which are broadly chronological there, but generic there about the different topics of the non-fiction. I've got non-fiction here, and the distinction is. I've got Religion and the Decline of Magic, which is all about why sort of magical belief systems disappeared throughout the early modern period. And then here I've got Malleus Maleficarum, which is a book about witches. Now that one over there, I'm reading it for the knowledge about what the author thinks what happened to magical da-da-da-da. This one here, I'm not really interested in the knowledge of how to spot and murder a witch, because I don't believe in witches. I'm here reading it to see how this witch problem was created and things like that. I'm reading them for slightly different reasons. That's why they're there. Not to mention, I've got piles on the floor, meaning they're books I plan to read soon, and books in crates that are books I've read recently and don't expect to want to read that soon. And then books that I've read recently but will want to revisit, go back on the shelf. See? It's not alphabetical. It's not necessarily the best system, but hey, that's another ramble. Today is a rambly day. I'm very sorry. This could be a very long video because I've got a lot of books to come. Let's hope in vino speditas. Brevitas? In vino brevitas. Next book was Once Upon an Alphabet by Oliver Jeffers. Oliver Jeffers is a really good little children's writer. That was putting him down. He's a really good children's writer. He's very interesting. And this takes the alphabet and gives them each letter a sort of short story. And this reminds me of nothing more than Daniel Calm's Incidents. They're structured very similar along lines of bathos. It builds up something and then it drops. So I'll show you one. And they're very short. And very much like Daniel Calm's to me, who I love. I managed to write an essay about Daniel Calm's in both my MA, which was philosophy, and my BA, which was writing. Swip that out, but So see, Cup lived in the cupboard. It was dark and cold in there when the door was closed. He dreamed of living over by the window where he'd have a clear view. One afternoon, he decided to go for it. Unfortunately, he forgot that the counter was a long way down and made of concrete. And then Cup turns up down again. It's just really sweet. I really like the tone of this book. O is my favourite. Out on the ocean, there is an owl who rides on the back of an octopus. They search for problems. They solve them. They move on. That's it. And they pop up again to solve someone else's problem. There's also one about a stupid parsnip who thinks he's a carrot. Really good book. Right, here is where we go on to the little side quest. Because the Dr. Johnson Reading Circle was about the biography of a man called Gilbert White, who I'd never heard of, who wrote a very famous book that I've never heard of. This is his famous book I've never heard of, The Natural History of Selborne by Gilbert White. And it purports to be letters from him to two different people, Daines Barrett, no, sorry, not Daines Barrett, that's someone else, Daines Barrington and Thomas Pennant. Though the letters were so chopped up and so many of them were invented, I don't know why he didn't just invent a third a fictional person for all the letters rather than the two people he did write to. Hey. In these, he starts off writing about his parish as a natural history location, and then through most of it, it's deeply observed things about the animals and particularly the birds. He's obsessed with birds. He loves swifts and swallows and a kind of bird called a hirondine, which are those kind of birds, house martins and stuff. And so he's really interested in them, particularly about migration. And weirdly, he starts, because migration, Aristotle said that swifts buried themselves under lakes in the winter, and a lot of people up until the 18th century, late 18th century, were still believing in it. Johnson believed that. But he starts off saying, no, I think they migrate. And then as he watches them, he starts to change his mind and decide that they do hibernate. And it's because of the way that birds pop up for a few days in sunny weathers and then disappear and then pop up again when it's sunny. What he's not really registering is that the birds in his village are a steady stream of birds coming through. He sees them as the same birds that live there for a portion of the year because he loves them so much. And so he manages, using facts, logic and careful observation, to argue himself into the wrong conclusion. But on the other hand, he did lots of other things. He distinguished different kinds of birds that we now distinguish as different. He wrote the first thing about the field mouse. A lot of field mouse died for this particular piece of information, especially their babies, because they cut their little nests and rattled them around. A lot of animals in general died for this book. However, it is a real move away from get an animal, cut it up and see what it is, and watching it in its natural habitat. And he has this real charming way of describing it. And it's a real, I'm not a country person at all, but I do love me birds, and I do like seeing the natural life that's around me, including all the nutty people. And he has this very warm, open way of looking at things. And he has this very meticulous way of recording things as well. And this put together makes it, apparently, a real grandstanding work of natural history. For me, it made it a very pleasant book about a place and the animals in it. And it was like, oh, that's pleasant. It was like a little holiday. Yeah. So then we read Gilbert White, the biography by Richard Mabey. And this was about the man who made the book. Who was a loser, essentially. He didn't progress at all in his career. He didn't progress in our love life. He never got married. He stayed in his parents' house for most of his life, and then when they died, basically took it over, looking at the animals. He was tied to his home. You get a sense of he doesn't want to be at first. He tries to move around, but he always ends up back home, and he always ends up sort of wedged into this place, and then he makes a feature of it, and he develops his house, and he becomes the best uncle anyone could have, and his house becomes a lovely holiday home for his 56 nephews and nieces who will come over to him and have a lovely time, and they'll go look at animals. He's a very not feckless, what's the word? I had a good word for him, but he doesn't take life by the horns. He doesn't seize the moment. He doesn't reach for greatness in any way. He drifts, and he drifts very happily. And to be honest, when I've been a teaching assistant for nearly 15 years, my novels aren't flying off the shelves. My love life is not hot and sizzly. I quite empathise with this guy who's just having a very nice life and enjoying himself, and just happens to come up with a book that is apparently a total classic at the end of it. It seems quite a good way to live, if you ask me. It doesn't, I was going to say it doesn't make for a very interesting book, but it's a short book, and it just emphasises just how pleasant this guy seems to be. He gets very excited at one point about growing melons, and it's a nail-biting melon farming chapter. There was a good bit about, he used to get coach sickness, and he paid back this woman the coach fare with a soup tureen. And the implication being that, one, he couldn't pay it because he was feeling so sick, and two, it's a soup for him because he was making his own soup on the journey. It's kind of a bit icky. Made me smile. It's a very, like the book. I mean, they're not for me because they're just not my kind of thing, but they're very pleasant in what they are, and I enjoyed them. But then I had to go back onto the books about books. So this one, 2021, so last year, Index, A History of the, by Dennis Duncan. Quite a lot of overlap with the alphabetization because, indexes are alphabetical. However, indexes have more of a sort of a form than just an alphabetical list. Two kinds of indexes, subject indexes and concordances. And concordances are word lists. And in fact, if you use a search engine, you're using a sort of super fast concordance. So we're moving away from the index now, which is something the alphabetical person didn't really talk about. They were saying how modern and great alphabetic order is, without mentioning the fact that we don't really need it anymore now we've got good search engines. But indexes, what they are, there were fears about indexes when they started coming out. So we get these two people, Grosseteste and Hugh Chappé, who create two kinds of indexes. They both appear in the alphabetical order book, but this book gives more of a biography. The alphabetical order book is all business. This has a little meander and tells you a bit about their lives. It's a little bit more light, to be honest. And you find out about them, and then the fears of index. What if people don't read the book properly? What if they just look at the index and jump to the bits they need? What if they just read the index and pretend they've read the book? And so sort of fears about Googling, is Google making us stupider, were about the index. Is our index making us stupider? Is it making life too easy for us? And it's interesting, those same fears just thread all through history. And we're always worried, and it's hard to know whether it's a fair thing to say they are or not. I'm not sure. The other thing was, there was a great chapter about indexes being used for satirical purposes. This is a particularly late 17th, early 18th century thing, 18th century, in which you'd get you get an enemy's book, and you make your own index, making the book look stupid. So you'd use the index to point out all the stupid bits in the book, which was pretty cool. And then you got people like Gay using his index in the poem Trivia, where he adds jokes. So there's a bit about playing football in Covent Garden, and Glazier kicks the ball and it smashes someone's window. And in the poem, the kind of implication is, oops, that shouldn't have happened. But the index says, skilled football playing Glazier. And you're like, oh, he's getting himself work by smashing windows with his football. And things like that. There were lots of little fun bits. I enjoyed the index book because I don't often look at indexes, and it encouraged me to. And there's two indexes in the book itself, one made by a computer, one made by a person. And you can see how one is easier to use, and also there are little jokes in there. So moving on to the next book about books, The Devil's Details, The History of Footnotes, Chuck Zerby. This one isn't as new. 2003. So if we're running books about things that would seem boring about books, the alphabeticization is the straightest one. This is the silliest. He is so partisan about footnotes. What a footnote is, how you should lay it out, namely at the foot of the book, not at the back, and what it should be used for. Like, he hates Alexander Pope for his footnotes in Dunciad Verorium, because he's not actually using the footnotes to develop the joke. He's just using it to use it as a separate way of slamming people. Whereas A for Ben wrote a joke poem where the footnotes further the joke. And he says he loves the footnotes for its ability to interrupt and change the flow of a book and add to it, and things like that. And so he includes books where he said it's like the overland of proper pristine information at the top, and then the underworld of the index giving you all the really interesting stuff. And he really loves interrupting and making silly jokes. And like, there's one point where he says this is the earliest, not index, footnote. Ugh, he'd be very angry if I forgot his footnote. Footnote. Yeah, so he finds what he thinks is the earliest footnote, and then says, if you find an earlier one, I'll take you to dinner, give you a lovely slap-up meal, and put you as a footnote in the next edition, which is great. because he can't rewrite that chapter because it's a huge long chapter in which he just imagines what the life of the first Footnote creator might be, and there's a lot of imagining, and then there's Footnotes saying, look, I know people think I'm just making stuff up, and this isn't really maybe padding for time, but hey, this is how I want to write the book, and this Footnote is admitting it to you, and he often says what he's doing in the book through the footnotes. And then sometimes he'll say what he's doing in the footnotes, what he's doing in the footnotes in the book. It's a very fun book. You'd be amazed that a book about footnotes is fun, but it is, and it was the most entertaining of the books about books. Though I enjoyed all of them. This was just the silliest because he actually didn't have much to say. Footnotes were developed. They were useful. They're kind of going out of fashion now. That's about it, really. And he's not happy they're going out of fashion. So the last book I read, kind of a non-fiction book. It's an essay on the art of ingeniously tormenting by Jane Collier. It's actually the fourth time I've read this. Jane Collier was a friend of the Fieldings. She died quite young, so she worked with one thing with Sarah Fielding called The Cry, which I really want to read. And she wrote that. And it's a wonderful thing because in the 18th century you got the middle class, and they've got three big genres they're looking at that they liked: sermons and improving genres, how-to guides, and novels. And this is a fake how-to guide about not improving yourself, about being a right shit. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, about how to be a right shit, how to torment people. And the key to it is, be nice sometimes. Make people like you, and put the knife in. But don't show you're putting the knife in. Just give it a little look. Be nice. Yeah. And then you can keep these fish on hooks forever and ever and ever. And that's the key to ingeniously tormenting. It's written with such glee and such gusto, and I love to make people's lives horrible. Here's how you do it. And it really comes up with a myriad ways to make people's lives horrible from all different kinds of relationships. If you're someone's wife, how to make the husband's life horrible. If you're someone's mistress, how to make the servant's life horrible. If you're someone's friend, how to make their life horrible. What it doesn't have is how the servants can make the master's life horrible, or how the kids can make the parents' life horrible, or how the people not in power can make the people in power's life horrible. And then it ends with this little story about a poem signed L about being ripped apart, or an animal being ripped apart. And everyone's like, whoa, this is some severe carnivorous poetry. This must be the lion or the leopard or someone. It turns out it's the lamb, because it's the people who have been tormented who can properly convey what it's like. And so the little hint at the end there is, this has happened to me. I know these horrible people, and I'm just pretending to be them. It's a little stab at the end. It's a really good book. I'm going to review it on my blog properly. I actually read it just to review it because it's one of my favourites, really. And I know I've never actually properly reviewed it, so I read it again to do that. Next month is July, and the plan is one of my formless, planless ones. Just hopefully no two books the same is the idea. Good luck.